Thanks for inviting me and letting me part of this conference. I'm really very excited about this because I think this is one of the very rare occasions where we have this kind of multi-professional setting where we can talk together for 2 days. And it's exciting to not hear whatever not being wherever means in this weird times. However, I think we became somewhat used to this kind of conference format and to this kind of mediated sociality. So I could just start, and maybe if you open your videos, it could be that I can see this because I now will share my screen, and I will have my own presentation on my screen. So there it is. I should now be able to see my presentation. Yeah, it's entitled "The Good, the Bad, and the Digitalization in Aesthetic and Arts Education." Actually, it's more about aesthetic education and the arts, so to say, arts and technology. And this title reflects actually and accidentally the order of my talk. It's I would start with something good, then it gets worse because it's 2020. Now things start getting better a bit. And then it gets a bit more digital, and then it gets about education. So let's start with a good thing on some biographical notes. So I would like to start with the promises of technology, that the promises towards participation and what you can do with that, and the promises of empowerment and gaining an identity, in this case, an identity as a bearded, white, somewhat elderly man playing an organ, whatever. There are many, like from the 70s. There are many of those pictures we have. For me, as a young boy, not exactly this kind of picture, but the organ. I would have not have noticed the guys and the women there. I would have just noticed the organ there, because this is something that interested me very much. So for me, as a working class child, living in a acoustically difficult environment, in a flat with no access to pianos, or not to think about piano lessons, this exactly is what a dream looked like. And it's a bit embarrassing, but if you know the German organ firm Versi, then this is a Versi organ, and I had this, but I had to build this myself. So this was quite a piece of work, the thing. I had to build and solder it myself from a huge construction kit. And not everything worked after this, but I had fun, and I soldered instead of learning how to play actually the organ, but I liked that. And of course, this brought with it a connection to technology. So this technology as a promise, that there was something about it for me. Certainly it enabled me to connect to music and musicality. If this concerns you, this was not the only electronic instrument I played after that. And then we had the next phase for me in my biographical development, so to say, and that was digitality as a promise. And here you see the Atari ST, and everyone making digital music knows how great still this machine can be for that. And you see the declaration of the independence of cyberspace by John Peribalo. Then you see a depiction of the blogosphere, where we all connected on using free formats, open protocols for this. And then we see the ultimate. There's a mic open, which distracts me. If you would be so kind to close your mics. And then you see that the New York, on the right lower corner, you see a Second Life, this platform. Most of you won't still remember what this is, but this was a virtual world, and you had to pay for it in the end, where all the universities were, and we would, and the New York Times thought this would be the ultimate distance learning facility, which now in Corona times we know it wasn't. But this is a picture of Harvard Law School, and this is interesting. So we had this promises of technology and of digitality, especially then we had the last decade. And that was like digitalization unleashed. It was a weird decade. at least for me as a researcher in the realm of digitality. So we had this mobile revolution with all the mobile devices, and then we had, based upon this, a huge wave of datafication, data gathering, big data, location data, all kinds of data. Then we had, based upon this big data, the huge rise of artificial intelligence, and then we had, based upon these artificial intelligence, algorithm cultures. And what these algorithm cultures did was building up effective economies that exploit affections, because affections, of course, are clickbait stuff, and you make money out of it if you have a company like Facebook. And effective economies support filter bubbles. Then we had the time of viral hashtag politics, such as Me Too, which of course we were happy about that, but also hashtag fake news or MAGA, Made America Great Again, which we were quite rather unhappy about. I guess so, most of us. We are gathered here together. And then we had the introduction of the post-truth, post-fact era, which we still are working, have to work upon in this COVID denial time. So already in 2014, Sascha Lobo, which is an important internet explicator in Germany, stated that the internet is kaput because of this. And of course, this is a kind of a problematic situation. So we discovered all the power aspects, and we discovered how vastly and how thoroughly digitalization changes the whole planet and our whole global ways of being. So this is why we talk nowadays more at least as much about post-digitality as we talk about digitality. And post-digitality, that means that we are in a state in which the structures of the digital realm, the forms and semantics and practices became universal. So like a pupil or a student, if he or she has a problem, it's not the first thing to think about that yourself. The first thing is to ask in WhatsApp what your peers would say about this and stuff like this. So much of digitality has become intertwined with everything else in the world, even our materialities. A car nowadays is a kind of computer that has wheels, as we know, at least a modern car. We communicate using memes, for example, and airports are hybrid spatialities. You know the story of the Berlin airport. It's more like a software where you have to build a building around all the security softwares and surveillance software, stuff like this. And then the building must build accordingly to these software construction, stuff like this. And post-digitality means, for example, that homes are becoming meta machines. We're discovering the softwareization of everyday life. We have the state of automatic decision-making, of artificial intelligence. And then there are organizations like Algorithm Watch, which even start to get some kind of grasp as a civic movement towards what's happening there with these algorithms. And then we have these weird thing that form and matter literally becomes an expression. We have the German word Ausdruck. This is like expression and printout at the same time of code, because a huge deal in architecture since quite some years is that what you build would not have been able to be built without computers. So creative and architectural processes, technical processes are deeply intertwined with humans and technologies. And you can even print out parts for your body, not of your body, but for your body. And for example, this is a bioprinter, and it costs less than a bigger Tesla, which I don't own. It's like $40,000 or so in 2018. And this is a usable bioprinter, for example. You can do things with that. Or we discovered this thing in of course, in arts. And I really love what artists are doing with this. For example, Holly Hampton, how artists are working with creative machinery and AI. But of course, this is also something that begins to threaten arts, begins to threaten musicians, which then even won't get any money from Spotify, and they don't get much money anyway if more and more pop songs are derived through AI technology. So digitalization goes along with all this massive transformation on cultural and social levels. And now you may ask, what does this have to do with aesthetics, aesthetic arts and cultural education? And now I have to apologize for leading you on a path, on an excursion, so to say, which contains a bit of educational theory and thinking. And this is because, especially because if you think about arts education, especially, I think the first picture that may come to your mind, I hope it's not the case, but empirically it is like those pictures of little children, girls, mostly, by the way, learning to play the violin. So this is some kind of imagery that we have about arts education. And of course, this happens in arts education, and that's okay. It has not, but arts education is not restricted to children and youth, although we always see children making music, playing theater, doing wonderful creative things. And this is such an important a branch of education for children and young people, and also adult people and elderly people, by the way. So I don't want to talk this down, but this is just one way to approach the idea of arts education, and it's not primarily the way that I want to discuss with you. But in the end, this kind of arts education, of course, is something that should be an aim for an educational scientist just like me. So what do I want to show you about this idea of these connects of culture, arts, and education? So what is the purpose of education? In the public awareness, the purpose of education is for example, vocational training, and to prepare people to become competent and useful members of society in a way. But this is not really the purpose of education in a historical view. Because education is a phenomenon that reaches back many thousands of years, and the first schools appeared in ancient Egypt like 4,500 years ago or so. So this is a very fundamental thing to human culture. So, and what education does basically is caring for the continuation of culture. So education is the means and the medium for culture to project itself into a future and to ensure that it can exist in a future. But this does not mean that this continuation of culture is a static one. Education, thoroughly understood, is not about conserving traditions. It's about connecting to traditions, to cultural forms of expressions, for example, to cultural ways of doing things, to cultural values, of course, to cultural means of communicating with one another. This is the core of that. It means to transmit and thereby enable to acquire an appropriate culture, which is always and basically a transformative process in itself. And so my slides. No society or culture will be exactly the same in the next generation, but the diversity of shared values, the diversity of shared ways of seeing and making sense of the world provides a starting point for each individual. That even though values and perspectives are subject to discussion and change, enables to understand the continuation of culture as a collective endeavor. This is also what education does, makes it understandable that we are not single individuals, that we are deeply connected with one another, and we can't afford to forget this, which is kind of the case in our hyper-individualistic time. So culture provides forms and semantics of perception. And in a way, there is no exterior to that. Or if it would be the exteriority of a sheer meaningless physical materiality, every kind of meaning we can make in any way stems from a culture. And of course, we can use the means of culture and of cultural expression to change this. And this is what I would like to talk about. So, but what is outside this? That would be, say, some insignificant lumps of stone, of rock. Oh, sorry, there's some accident happened with my presentation. I will be online in a second. That's kind of awful. Just a sec. Be right back, and here we go. So here are the insignificant lump of stones I just talked about. So this is even when we try to find something that is completely out of culture, and the dumbest kind of material, we have the most insignificant rock floating through an even more meaningless, the even more meaningless voids of empty space, and then we give that a meaning too, and we even give it a name. For example, this is a meteorite or an asteroid. I don't know the difference really, and it has been named Apophis. And Apophis, this is the ancient Egypt deity who embodied chaos as the opposite of the order or of the truth, the very important Ma'at for the ancient Egyptian culture. So this is the opposite of order and the prolongation of life. And so this is deep stuff, so to say, for stone lump to call it. And maybe it's because it's in suspicion of hitting the Earth in 2068 that could have been connected to that. Honestly, I don't know this. So we have this Apophis, and it's called chaos. But let's stick with the snake for a moment, because I think this is interesting. We have this stone, and the stone gets the name of this snake deity, and the snake deity depicts chaos. And this lets us understand how aesthetics work. Aesthetics happens when cultural forms of perception are kind of folded upon themselves. So we have this abstract cultural concept of chaos in ancient Egypt, deeply rooted in values and cosmology, because this is bad. It's a bad snake. It's not a good snake. The Ma'at, the order, is a good thing because life can be prolonged and culture can be prolonged in the future. And the snake is chaos, and thus is death and destruction and stuff like this. So we have this abstract concept, and now we have a perceivable form. We have this image, which we can see. And this form is responding or answering to this abstract cultural concept and giving it a picture. And so we may then connect to that picture as a thing standing for the chaos. And so we can talk about that chaos thing. So we have these two sides, so to say. We have the normative order of things, the Ma'at, or the chaos, and we have the aesthetic order of things, which is the picture of the snake. So this is why aesthetics, through most history of organized manhood, so to say, had to be tightly controlled. And this is why, after the decline of clerical and aristocratic power in the Middle Ages, the arts became more and more autonomous. The arts started to detach themselves from the moral criteria, and furthermore only accepted aesthetic criteria in the 18th century. And this is what philosopher Jacques Rancière, which I will talk about a bit soon, calls the introduction of the aesthetic regime in the arts. So historically, there begins to be a kind of disconnection between these two realms. And the realm of the aesthetic becomes autonomous, following its own rules. And these are questions of beauty and whatever. And the realm of the normative doesn't have any say or much say about this. And this is what my interpretation of what Jacques Rancière calls dissensus. So here we have the dissensus between that. Of course, as we all know, the actual practices of arts and cultural education tend to strive more for consensus. as a normative or prescribed way of perceiving things, like in arts lessons in school or so, how to look at a picture, rather than for dissensus, but that's another problem. So what's dissensus? Dissensus, as Rancière writes, it is not a conflict of interest for him, or opinions or values, like a battle with arguments or so. But he uses the words dissensus, and you have to read the sense in the word dissensus. And he means perception, perceiving the world. A dissensus is a division inverted in common sense, a dispute over what is given and about the frame within which we see something as given. So this is what I'm talking about, has to do with aesthetics, arts and cultural education, because it should be about inquiring about the possibilities of dissensus, because dissensus lets us step out of the usual ways of perceiving, which Rancière called the police. And the police is not the policeman or so, police woman or guy. The police is the accepted order of things, and police is what makes us think that the world is like it is in our normal state. And dissensus is that emergent happening, which lets us see that how we thought things would be and how we perceived things are not like they have to be perceived, and they have to be. And of course we have the very, very important issues of our time, like we learned from gender studies, that how we perceive sex and gender. And the way we perceive that seemed oh so natural. And we learned that there was nothing natural about the way we perceived sex and gender in Western societies, for example. So, and we had to have these emergences of emergent performances, sorry, of like in arts, for example, with Conchita Wurst, a very famous person in that regard. And this shifted the way we see the world. And we have that with racism and color and people of color. So the way we looked and we perceive color in white dominated society is a certain way. And there's kind of discrimination, at least if not kind of racism built in, so to say, in the way we perceive color. And this is what we grew up with. And dissensus works to changing this frame of perception. So, and I think this dissensus is something that is very important with regard to digitalization, because we have this kind of police, which is the power of society. And Rancière speaks about the police as the power of the normative society, so to say, the societal institutions, such like schools and stuff like this. But now we have a disruptive new order, as I showed in this 2010th decade slide. We have an order of digital disruption of this old power. Now you could say, well, it's fine, we have a new power disrupting the old power because we can find our way in between, and that's a good idea, I would say. But we have to see that the new power, as we have, as I try to show, of course, brings a huge bunch of its own problems. So it does change our ways of seeing things to its own good, to a big degree. And of course, algorithmic and effective economies and algorithmic forming, so to say, of our imagery world, or of a world of musical listening and hearing. These are, of course, these things I talk about here. And so I come already to my conclusion in time, I hope. So this is why I think we have gathered together here, I hope so, at least, inquiring the shift in modes of perception and power that go along with disruptive social technologies and social cultural changes like those I just talked about. This is something that demands a collective design-centered approach in a broad sense of design, not a narrow sense like IKEA or so. A transformative learning process related to digitality is not something that can merely happen inside the heads of people. Digital structures and cultural structures are the affected structures, so to say, and there will be no process of change unless dissensing views on digitalization bring forth alternatives to the hegemonial implementations of digitality and other stuff that shape our current present. So we have to discover where and how we want to apply our own politics of the senses and our own politics of the technological. This is something that artists already has much to learn of it. This is also something that designers of technology have proved to do. I think we should recognize and foster those efforts which do not just follow the easy way of marketing, making use of the cheap old promises of technological shortcuts to self-empowerment and unleash creativity. In my German language, we have this concept of Bildung, which is impossible to translate in a way, something embracing formation, transformation, and becoming. And this Bildung has always been reduced to the mode of one single individual, a learner, pupil, or scholar. But our times show like no other that Bildung in this meaning is becoming a matter of human sensitivities, intelligences, medialities, and materialities altogether, and technologies, of course. There will be no better world with dumb or even worse, malicious technology. So we have to step up and become those impossible subjects of aesthetic dissensus. And thus we should start talking, which means I should stop talking. Just some last remarks. And then we should start working together where possible, by the way. So I was privileged to learn in the recent years of research on post-digital culture, on post-digital culture and creativities, about, for example, the uses of technology that actually know and foster that we have bodies and we are bodies, experiencing and creative bodies that do not have to be overcome and augmented by technology, but that can relate and literally connect to a friendly, if nonetheless strange otherness of technological or digital extensions. And we can think about, just to name some example, and can't name them all. We could think about the Mimo gloves or these somatic devices of Soma Industries, these synthesizers that work with your body. We may think about uses of digitality that are responsive and decisively non-hegemonic, like this mad musicking app TC11. If you don't know it, I really recommend that. It's old, but it's still confusing and it's wonderful. I saw uses of digitality that abstain from ideas of complete control, of mastering and domination, and that understand that these are but hegemonial phantasms. For example, many ideas arise that belong to an order of the curatorial, which bears a moment of historiographical care about things. If we see how ancient devices are meticulously transferred and rethought into the digital realm, newest example would be Heinbach's wonderful apps like Fundamental or Wires. This are time travel apps, so to say, aesthetic time travel experience. And at the same time, they are curatorial. But I think also Piano Tech, for example, shows how this kind of caring to the relations of concrete, historical, important instruments. So from approaches like this, we can learn to think and sense differently in an empowering way. And this is what aesthetic education should be about, and what especially the educational sectors should finally start to learn from you. As you were so kind to join this conference, I hope this would be a step into this direction. Many thanks for your attention.